on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
Foraging something different. Foraging things that you cannot see. Bacteria, yeast, foraging microbes.
Modern people in the last couple decades have forgotten essentially all of our food preservation techniques. And there could be a world in the future where it would be useful to know that stuff.
If you really want to take wildcrafting as a serious discipline and a way of life, you will discover very fast that foraging is really about food preservation.
You go out and maybe forage some apples, press those off into juice, and you're going to end up with alcohol, and then it becomes a vinegar. So it's kind of a natural progression.
My mountain vinegar is a blend of pine, juniper berries, yarrow, mugwort, 12 to 14 different ingredients, and it tastes like the mountain. It's such an exploration of the terroir.
That's 3 extra species that day that you got into your diet. It's important to eat the genome of lots of species.
Don't even try to think outside of the box, because if you do that, you already assume there is a box in the first place.
Episode 155 of the WildFed podcast, Foraging Microbes with Pascal Baudar, is brought to you by Surthrival. Proper digestion is critical to good health and strong immunity. That's why I'm a huge believer in using Surthrival's colostrum daily in my morning blended drinks, and that's why I take Surthrival digestive bitters with my meals. In addition to being 3 times more effective against flu than vaccine in vivo studies with high-risk patients, bovine colostrum is an outstanding supplement for restoring the delicate lining of the digestive tract, making it a great health support to anyone looking to improve their digestion. And herbal bitters help increase the flow of bile and other digestive juices, helping ensure we extract more nutrition from the foods we eat. Right now until the end of October, Surthrival's flagship colostrum product and herbal digestive bitters are on sale, and the coupon code TREAT20 gets you 20% off those products at surthrival.com. Are you concerned about rising food prices and food security? Do you strive to be more self-reliant and live more sustainably? Learning to forage and grow your own mushrooms can help you take a leap forward in your food sovereignty. Mushrooms are nutritious, containing protein, vitamins, minerals, and a list of sophisticated medicinal benefits. And unlike other garden crops, you won't need a lot of space or time to grow an entire year's supply and save money on your grocery bills. You can even grow mushrooms in an urban environment, and if you know how to wild forage them safely and sustainably, you can get your supply freely off the landscape. Our friends at Wild Muskoka Botanicals have been growing and foraging mushrooms for over a decade and have put together a comprehensive online training. Avoid the most common mistakes when learning to grow edible and medicinal mushrooms. Learn the best techniques and species for your specific conditions and become more confident in your wild mushroom identification skills. They're currently offering WildFed listeners $30 off the course. Go to themushroomcourse.com. Again, it's themushroomcourse.com and enter WildFed 30 for $30 off, and take a leap forward in your health, self-reliance, food security, and knowledge of mushrooms. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Pascal Baudar is a legend in the world of wild foods, constantly advancing the practice of foraging into new and unexplored terrain. While many of us focus on calories or medicinal plants, Pascal is uncovering the terroir hidden in places most of us just don't think to look. Sure, there's been a lot of work done on fermentation in the last decade, but nothing quite like what Pascal has been doing. He marches to the beat of his own drum, and if he's drawing off other influences, I certainly can't tell. He seems to be inspired from some mysterious and unseen source. Just take a look at his social media and you'll see things there you won't find anywhere else. When I set out to create this podcast, I wanted to curate the voices of the most influential characters in the world of wild food, and that list wouldn't be complete without Pascal. I really enjoy this interview because aside from discussing his book and the work he's been doing on vinegars and ferments, we go beyond food and get into the philosophy that underlies the why of what he does. Pascal, thank you for all the original and groundbreaking work, and thanks for the reminder about what's really important in life. This interview was, for me, an inspiration. Pascal Baudar, welcome to the show.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Normally I would say welcome back to the show, but I actually think this is a completely different podcast. I think I was still doing Rewild Yourself when we last spoke, so it's been several years.
Yeah, I think we did it in 2017.
Oh man, so much has It's a different world today.
Yeah, no.
I'm now married, and my wife is francophonic. She was
Congratulations.
from Montreal, so I get a little bit of French immersion. Hey, congratulations on your new book, man! Wildcrafted Vinegars. This is exciting.
Yeah, thank you. That's a fun book.
I realized this morning that you've published 2 other books since I last spoke to you. So last time I had you on, we were talking about the new wildcrafted cuisine. But tell me
Right.
about the books that have happened in between, and then I'd love to get into this book a little bit.
Yeah, so it's interesting if you think about it. What I've done since the last time we spoke is I started to put my attention on foraging something different. And we're talking about foraging things that you cannot see or even touch. We're talking about bacteria, yeast, all kind of different stuff like that, like basically microbes. I started foraging microbes. Um, and, when I wrote the book, the new Wildcrafted Cuisine, a lot of people were interested by the wild beer, of course. And I said, okay, well, I can go deeper into the subject. And I wrote a book called The Wildcrafting Brewer, where basically I spent a couple of years studying ancestral brews and shamanic brews, but not just beers and brews, but also sodas and sodas and meads and all kind of different stuff, and also how to use foraging to basically imbue flavors in the drink, and also how to forage wild yeast. So pretty much that book is about doing wild drinks that are fermented using wild yeast, so it's alcoholic fermentation. And then after that, I did one about using lactobacteria, which can be found in the wild too, to basically do fermentation, lacto-fermentation. When we say lacto-fermentation, usually we think about kimchi, sauerkraut, this kind of ferment. But with wild food, you can go like really deep. You can, I fermented mustard leaves, radish leaf, fermenting roots, for using herbs, fermented herb paste, all kind of different stuff. And then I have like 3 books project I would love to do. And the vinegar one was not really my priority, but I needed to write it because it was kind of like the book that was missing from what I call the Trinity, which are really the 3 types of bacteria and yeast you can find in the wild in North America and Europe. And Acetobacter, which are basically the bacteria that can turn any alcoholic beverage into vinegar, was really a must. So I decided to write a book about wildcrafted vinegar, and some good reason for it too, but we can talk about that.
Yeah, it's a natural progression, because if let's say you're a forager and you go out and maybe you forage some apples and then, you press those off into juice, you can let those sort of naturally ferment. They'll quickly start to bubble up, become like a soda. But then if you were to put an airlock and make an anaerobic environment, then you're going to end up with alcohol. And then take the lid off that and that'll go. And then becomes a vinegar. So it's kind of a natural progression. One of the first things you introduced the book with is a bit of a discussion about how modern people, and I mean like very modern people, like in the last couple decades, have forgotten essentially all of our food preservation techniques. And you sort of hint at how there could be a world in the future where it would be useful to know that stuff. And I think when you and I last spoke, 2017, I mean, that's kind of stuff anything like that seemed a little far-fetched. And then now we live in a world where we've seen big shutdowns, we've seen shortages, we're sort of still dealing with supply chain issues. And, there's quite a bit on the horizon still with farmers going on in multiple different countries and supply chain issues, where it's like, wow, some of these things could actually really, truly be important, not just the novelty of it. So I was curious if you could address that, because you're so right in that, these days, canning or food preservation, you're either like a real crunchy kind of hippie type person, or you're like a, maybe still like a Lehman's catalog or like a Amish type person, but otherwise the rest of the world community seems to forget about these things.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I was giving a class in Santa Monica College, and I mean, those are people who, young kids who are getting degrees in all kind of different stuff. And I remember during the class, I was talking about wild plant, but I say, okay, who knows about food preservation technique? And only one person in the whole class of 40 say, oh, I know how to make kimchi, because she was Korean. And that was a good example right there. There's probably like 40 different types of food preservation technique that exist, traditional, and out of 40 very, very educated young kids, only one of them knew how to preserve their food.
Wow.
And if you think about it, if you don't know how to preserve your food, you're completely at the mercy of the food system. And should the food system collapse, and I'm not a survivalist, but if the food system collapse, which could happen, and it did happen from time to time during the pandemic, you are in the shit, really, because you don't know anymore how to preserve your food. And from a wild crafting perspective, if you're really a wild crafter, I mean, if you really want to take wild crafting as a serious discipline and a way of life, you will discover very fast that wild crafting or foraging is really about food preservation technique. Because unlike the tomatoes that you can find at the store at any time of the year, which is kind of freaky, really, it's not the case with wild food. Your wild food will be available for 2 or 3 months at the most, will change, like the mustard will grow, you get sprouts, then you have a small plant, you can start using the leaves, the stems, and then you can use the seeds, you can use the flowers, and then you can use the roots. So it will go through several stages. But if it is a lifestyle for you and your diet is mostly composed of wild food, or you're a chef and you're really interested into playing with wild food from a culinary perspective, preserving food is crucial. Otherwise, you're going to be collecting wild food for 2 or 3 weeks and that's it, it's gone.
Yeah, and you make a really fantastic point in that chapter where you talk about how, if you think about it, most of the food in the supermarket are preserved foods. So we're quite used to maybe at the core of what we eat, we use fresh foods, but then all the accoutrements are typically going to be preserves, particularly condiments. I'm somebody who, one thing I like about talking to you and just like knowing you're out there is we occupy really different ends of the spectrum of what wild crafting is about. And I've always been this really calorie focused person. And my impression, I don't want to speak for you, but is that you're very flavor focused and you occupy a niche that kind of nobody else does in our wild food community. And I really just love what you're doing. And so for me, especially because I hunt and fish a lot, I bring a lot of protein to the table, but that kind of stuff is not that fun without condiments. And then when you look at what condiments are, they're flavor preservation essentially. And so this is like one of those areas where you're, because what a shame to I bring a beautiful piece of wild swordfish or venison or bison to the table, and then I got to use, a Heinz condiment. Like it's really cool, the idea to,
totally.
You know what I'm saying? To use a wild crafted condiment. And when you flip any condiment over and you start reading what's in it, it's like vinegar. That's like one of the core ingredients. So you're sort of opening up a lot of options to people. And it's not like it's a big change since we're already used to eating a lot of preserved foods, right?
Yeah, but also like even from a meat perspective or fish, pickled fish, vinegar is used for that. You can also use vinegar for doing all kinds of different jerkies, for example, is very common to use. And you can preserve meat in vinegar too. You have pickled pig feet, for example.
Right.
So it's definitely vinegar should be so important. I'm kind of amazed, sometimes on social media where people say, well, what do you use vinegar for? And my God, they are like so, because people don't think with it anymore. They think of vinegar as salad dressing.
Yeah.
Kind of. But I could list probably like 20 different uses of vinegar that people were like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, from like cleaning your windows, to all these culinary applications. Yeah, and another aspect of it too, because as you were saying, you can pickle in it.
Yeah,
This year we were harvesting alewives. We have a spring run of these incredible river herring that come up our East Coast rivers into lakes to spawn in the spring, and they're in the rivers like thick, where you
yeah,
can't see the river bottom. There's just hundreds of thousands of these fish. The challenge with them is you can't cut a fillet off and just cook it up. They have a woven tangle of bones. And so we're always trying to figure out what to do with that. When we pickle them, in addition to the preservation quality, vinegar, acetic acid is a strong chemical, and it dissolves those bones. And
yeah.
so not only are we preserving the fillets, but then I can just eat them without having to pick bones out of my mouth because the bones essentially disappear. And so there's that chemical action of it. Or I mentioned even cleaning. I mean, that's just a way of speaking to its powerful chemical nature, that
Yeah.
powerful low pH. So very useful product outside of just how we normally think of, like you said, salad dressing.
But if you think about it, like you can make incredible gourmet food with any wild food by having a good quality vinegar. A very tasty, flavorful vinegar, for example. You know, quick pickle. You know, not a lot of American or even European do quick pickle anymore. But quick pickle is you take an ingredient and you put it to vinegar overnight, and usually you use seasoned vinegar. A little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, and then some, flavor that you put in it, maybe fruit juice or, the vinegar can be flavored from starting. And if you're forager, for example, one of my favorite is taking cattail and cut the cattail shoot when it's still tender and put a little bit of seasoned vinegar and then just leave it for a couple of hours before serving it. And people are just going crazy. And the vinegar that I like to use is one that is a mix of smoked mushroom and seaweed.
Oh, wow. So you got those really
So,
good umami flavors in there.
oh my God, yes. And people just go crazy on it. They go like, wow, this is so good. And it's just cattle in vinegar. And you can do that with pretty much any wild food. You can even quick pickle mushroom if you wanted to. It's just such a way to turn, regular wild food into something gourmet. And it takes just a couple of hours.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too, because I like to do tacos for people because I always have such exotic meats around, and so I'll do iguana tacos or something strange like that. And one of the things that always gets people is I'll just quickly pickle an onion while I'm cooking. I mean, I can just take a red onion and pickle it, and
Yeah,
it takes like 20 minutes or something, and it's done.
totally.
So I think sometimes people imagine these preserves, take weeks or months to produce, but they don't. So I like that you brought that
No.
up, that it can be done quickly.
Yeah, and also like if you do your tacos, one of the things in my book is collecting wild herbs and do paste out of it, like chimichurri type of thing, but using chickweed, chervil, like a lot of like very tasty wild greens, and you can make incredible sauce that will go with meat or non-meat if you're vegetarian or vegan, you know. But you can make some incredible sauce and herb paste using vinegar.
Something else you mentioned too, I had never thought about this. Yeah, I've thought a lot about, I guess, with many foods, how we're losing variety. You mentioned in the book potatoes, a really good example. You've got, something like 4,000 varieties of potatoes that were developed down in South America and Peru, but or maize is the same way. You start traveling down to Mesoamerica and you see just so many varieties of maize eaten in different ways for different, different varieties for different types of eating. And then you brought up, well, with vinegars, if you go to the market, you've got basically a few options. I hadn't really thought about vinegars as a place where we were losing diversity, but I guess it kind of is, right? Because traditionally, around the world, I imagine many types of vinegars would have been made, because basically anything that's got a carbohydrate that can be turned into alcohol could later be turned to vinegar, right?
Yeah, and totally. And when I grew up in Belgium, it was completely normal I mean, when I grew up in Belgium as a kid, you could still see the old, I forgot the name in English. Basically, people were growing their own fruit trees, like cherries and stuff like that,
Orchard?
apples and pear orchards. Yeah, in Belgium, which even at the time, I'm 62 now, but even at the time when I was a kid, those were not used anymore. They were the remnant from the older generation already. you know, but if you think about it, all this stuff had to be preserved. So people were doing their own cider, people were doing their own perry, which is fermented, pears, cherries, wine, and also they were turning all those into vinegar because they had to. If you think about it, going to the store was not always an option for those people, who were living in rural countries. Even right now, I live in California. I mean, I'm traveling in an RV, but I have a pottery studio in California. And when I'm in there, I'm in the mountain, and the closest store is 40 minutes away. And I have a car. So in the old days,
Right.
people really had to be self-sufficient,
Yeah.
and vinegar was absolutely key to that to preserve your food.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit about these processes, because understanding, just like an athlete, like if you're an athlete, it's important to know the difference between anaerobic work and aerobic work, because
Right.
you get very different results based on, your heart rate and your breathing. Well, similarly, when you're talking about food preservation, this is a really big difference. Are we doing something aerobically or anaerobically? So maybe we could talk a little bit about that so that people understand these different processes, because you can't just make vinegar. It's vinegar has got you've got to do a step in between, right? So you've got to first go to alcohol, and that's
Right.
done in a completely different way. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit so people understand these two distinctions.
Yeah. So alcohol you're dealing basically with different bacteria. And food preservation is always about food safety, and some bacteria will like oxygen, and some bacteria or yeast will like oxygen, and some may not like oxygen. Yeast doesn't like oxygen, for example. So if you create a specific environment for specific bacteria or yeast, you basically give them a chance to be the winner, and you don't have other bacteria or mold or anything that could spoil your food. So it's basically a game of food safety and understanding what bacteria you're playing with or yeast you're playing with, and helping the yeast or the bacteria to win the battle against the bacteria that could spoil your food.
Hmm.
A good example would be lactobacteria. And there is actually, when you do a sauerkraut or you do a kimchi, you basically have four different um, you have a strategy, and you basically have four different methods of killing the bad bacteria that could spoil your food and helping the good bacteria that can save your food and preserve the food. And the good bacteria in this case will be the lactobacteria. So for lacto fermentation, we're going to be using salt. By using salt, you're probably killing 90% of the bad bacteria because they can't stand salt, which is why salt has always been used for food preservation technique, even salted pork or salted fish, for example.
Right.
Then after that, you are going to be uh, feeding your good bacteria, and in this case, for the lactobacteria, we are going to use sugar. And the salt is actually breaking down the cell of the plant we are using, usually from the Brassica family, like cabbage and stuff like that. And the sugar is inside the cell. So by using salt, you're releasing the sugar and you're
Mm.
feeding the good guy. And then you go further and you're removing oxygen. The lactobacteria, they don't need oxygen. So they're like, I don't care, remove the oxygen. But the bad bacteria need it. So they go like, oh my God, I can't breathe. So you're killing more bad bacteria.
That's done with the
And
submersion in the briny liquid. Is that because not
yeah,
everybody
or you can
uses
use
an,
an airlock.
some people, yeah, but you don't have to use an airlock, right? But you do kind of have to have it under the water line. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. But even doing that, you still having a little bit of risk because it's still even your brine is wide open to the oxygen,
Right.
and if you have a little piece that is floating like a little island,
Yeah. You'll
that's
see it
already an
mold right over.
invitation for mold.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Of course.
and then the difference with lactofermentation is you end up with the bacteria eating the sugar and creating lactic acid. So you basically killing whoever was left in terms of bad bacteria into an acidic environment. So it's a
Ah,
very mean way of preserving food for the bad bacteria.
got it. Okay. And so that's interesting with lactobacillus, that it can handle both the high saline environment
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
can, and I mean, its name means acid loving, right? Acidophilus. So it loves that low
yeah.
pH too,
Oh, totally.
because like you're saying, salt, pH, and protection from oxygen. That's how we typically preserve things. So it's really neat that
Yeah.
this bacteria that's so symbiotic with us can survive those kind of conditions. Loves them.
Yeah, and wild yeast is kind of like that too. Wild yeast doesn't like oxygen. So you basically, by removing the oxygen and do fermentation with no oxygen, you basically removing a lot of the potential bacteria that can spoil your beer, your wine, or your soda or your mead.
Mm.
Uh, but Acetobacter, on the reverse, love oxygen.
Well,
So for
talk
the
to us
acid
though
for
in
making
between. So we talked lacto fermentation. Let's talk alcohol so that we can get into Acetobacter because that kind of
yeah.
follows after, right?
Yeah. So wild yeast is super easy. How do you find wild yeast? You can find wild yeast in nature everywhere, and
Hmm.
you can even go to the store and forage for wild yeast. Um, i- if you take a look at blueberry, for example, or if you take a look at grapes or even plums, you see a white bloom on it.
Yeah.
And that white bloom is actually composed of wild yeast and some kind of wax, but it's really loaded with wild yeast.
Okay.
So if you want it, sometimes I do starter. I like to do starter because it really kicks off the fermentation very fast. So sometimes I do starter. I take a bunch of blueberries and I put them in a jar. I put 10% sugar, 90% water, and then shake everything. And you just leave it as is.
Uh.
And 3 days later, your jar is about to explode. Because the yeast will start eating the sugar and create alcohol. But during the process, you also get a lot of fermentation gases. So it's that simple. You just to do a starter, you can even do that with blueberry and keep fermenting it anyway, and you end up with some kind of blueberry cocktail or blueberry wine just by doing that.
And
Sugar, berries. Yeah,
it's so common to use a store-bought packet of yeast, like a champagne yeast or something like that when people do meads or ciders or something like that. But
that's
but
correct.
but you're saying you could just as easily produce your own, bypass
Right.
that store-bought thing and do the blueberries or the grape skins or something like that where you've got this yeast already present.
Well, and you need to, by the way, because if you use champagne yeast in a commercial champagne yeast, they already kill the acetobacter that are in it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they don't. You will only, as from all the research I've done and the experiment I've done, you will only get the acetobacter from wild yeast because they live together.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So the Acetobacter's there, but it
Yeah,
can't start its process until it gets some oxygen.
yeah. But also in a commercial yeast, you basically have very, very specific
Right.
strain of
Mhm.
yeast that are cleaned up of every imperfection.
Yeah. Yeah, we get factory
So
farmed yeast.
yeah, so I know winemaker doesn't want to have acetobacter in that yeast.
Right,
A
right,
beer
right.
maker doesn't want to. So if you're using acetobacter, or if you're using, sorry, regular yeast or commercial yeast, then you're going to have to introduce the culture to make the vinegar.
Mhm. Got it. So when we're doing the alcohol, we're doing that anaerobically. We're not allowing oxygen in there. So we've got the airlock on. So as gases are produced, they bubble up out
Right.
of that airlock. And
Yeah.
so there's positive pressure inside the container so that no outside air is getting in, only inside gases are getting out. So the oxygen's used up very quickly. And then that's when those sugars, is it Saccharomyces that's doing that process, converting
Sure.
the sugars? Yeah.
Sure. Whatever you want. I don't go into those details. Like I don't need to understand the name of the
Right,
of the
right.
bacteria or the yeast to actually make it. I
Yeah.
keep, people when they were making wine or beer 2,000 years ago didn't know the name of
Had
the organism. They
no
just did it.
idea, right?
And I'm still the same way, by the way.
Yeah, even until pretty
But
recently too. Yeah.
but guess what? If you wanted to make vinegar, you can actually do an open fermentation.
Okay, tell me about that.
An open fermentation will be you basically, this is the way you will do it primitively. You basically take a clay container, for example, and make a beer or a primitive wine in it by fermenting wild grapes or different berries that you collect. And you do an open fermentation. There is nothing, you can protect it a little bit from fruit flies. I would protect it from fruit flies and another critter that can go in by using cloths or something like that. But eventually, because it's open, it will go from turning into alcohol naturally, even with open fermentation, and then naturally turn into vinegar because it is open fermentation.
Okay, so okay, thank you. I was under the impression, I'd first make let's say my hard cider with an airlock, then I would remove that and let that become vinegar. But you're saying if I just had an open container of cider and maybe I cover it with some cheesecloth or something to keep the bugs out, but that would, as alcohol is being produced, it's quickly converting to vinegar as well. So you're saying you don't need to do those stages so discreetly.
No, but it's actually, yeah, you can do both. You can totally do both. It works both way. And I found out it's actually more safe if you do like an alcoholic fermentation first and then turn it into vinegar.
Yeah.
Because if you do an open fermentation, you're more open to all kind of possible spoiling that can happen. Although I've been successful, I would say like 90% of the time by doing open fermentation.
Okay.
But there is this 10% chance that you may end up with some kind of mold that finds its way in, even through the fibers of the thing that you protected,
Right.
your brew with. When you do it in both way, like first ferment the alcohol anaerobically and then open it to oxygen and then turn it into vinegar, I have 100% success with that method.
How long does it take for something like a beer, a wine, a cider to become a finished vinegar to the standard that you'd want it to be?
Anywhere between 3 to 3 weeks, depending on the temperature of the environment.
Oh wow, that's pretty fast. I've
Usually,
Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just going to say I've had things that I thought I was making alcohol, realizing later I've had a bad seal, and found that I had really nice vinegars in the end. Anyway, I tried for the longest time. I've never really had good success making maple syrup into alcohol, but I've had great results making these brandy-like or port-like vinegars that have come out of it. I'm not exactly sure where I went wrong, but delicious vinegars come out of that. Please tell me.
I can tell you where you went wrong right now.
Please, yeah.
A lot of people don't understand that because a lot of people on social media say, well, I did this elderberry wine, I would not turn it into vinegar. Or I did this, blueberry, blackberry wine, I just would not turn it into vinegar. And in order to make vinegar, you need an alcoholic content of 3 to 9% alcohol.
Okay.
Anything above that is too strong. Oh. So elderberry wine usually end up at 12 to 14, sometimes for me up to 16% alcohol. So you have to dilute it. You have to add water.
Oh, because it sterilizes itself.
Exactly. Like if you want to do like a red wine vinegar and you go to the store and buy red wine, what you need to do, you look at the content and usually it says, well, it's 12% alcohol.
Yeah.
So it's too much. So you want to go down to, for example, 6% alcohol, so you add 50% water. And then you add 20% of unpasteurized vinegar. See, you don't even need to forage. You buy some like Bragg's vinegar unpasteurized, you add 20% of that, and that's it, you're done. It's guaranteed to turn into vinegar within 4 to 6 weeks. Wow. And you made your own red wine vinegar.
So, yeah, okay, so a person who doesn't care about the foraging component, just as a thought experiment, you could go to the store, buy a bottle of red wine, dilute it down, put some Bragg's, apple cider vinegar in there, and you could make your own vinegar that way too.
Totally. But guess what? It will be gourmet compared to what you will buy at the store because the method that they use in some of they add stuff to vinegar too.
Yeah.
The flavor will be absolutely awesome compared to any red wine vinegar you're going to purchase at the store, which very often on top of it is even pasteurized. I don't know why they pasteurize vinegar, but they do. So the pasteurization process, and the pasteurization process will change, the flavor. But you can make some gourmet stuff, dude. I've made some vinegar with like an 18 or 12 or 18 years old whiskey that was aged in oak barrel.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh my God. Or you take a Belgian beer and you turn it into vinegar. It's just absolutely, you cannot buy this stuff at the store.
We'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first, I've got some good news about the WildFed TV show. You can now stream both seasons 1 and 2 on demand at myoutdoortv.com. That's myoutdoortv.com. myoutdoortv.com. My Outdoor TV is Outdoor Channel's premium online subscription service. They host thousands of episodes of hunting and fishing content, making this a great subscription service for anyone interested in the outdoors. But if you just want to see WildFed, grab yourself a free trial subscription and then check out all 20 episodes at no charge at all. If you decide to keep it, it's just $9.99 a month. We're currently in production for season 3 of WildFed, which should start airing around the beginning of 2023. Hey, thanks again for all your incredible support. If you haven't already, I can't wait for you to see the show. Is a white vinegar often like when you have like a bulk, a 1 gallon container of that? That's also distilled too, right? Don't they?
Yeah, distilled, and it's basically just sugar and water that has been distilled.
Yeah.
So the fermentation is sugar and water. There's no flavor whatsoever. I never use white vinegar ever, 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 ever.
Yeah, well, understandable. It sounds like you've got some incredible flavors, and I'm really interested in the idea of just playing with different alcoholic beverages to see what they produce. And that's a really fascinating concept.
And to be honest, I got even better flavor, not better, but I get stronger flavor by infusing fruits, berries, plants into vinegar that I make. Like even if it's an apple cider vinegar that I make a lot of apple cider vinegar, by the way, by going to the store because we don't have apples in California, and buying some organic apple juice.
Okay.
Then I turn it into a cider, and then I turn it into vinegar, and then I infuse wild berries, like infusing cocktail the berries inside the vinegar, or smoked mushroom and seaweeds, or all kind of different herbs. My God, you can achieve flavor by just simply through infusing wild plant berries, fruits, roots in mushrooms into those vinegar and create gourmet vinegar, even if you use a commercial apple cider vinegar.
Yeah. So at what stage are you infusing it after the vinegar is complete or while it's becoming vinegar?
Yeah, I usually do. Like one of my favorite is the pine or mountain vinegar too. My mountain vinegar is like a blend of pine, fir, pinyon pine branches, juniper berries, manzanita berries, yarrow, mugwort. I mean, there's probably like 12 to 14 different ingredients now that I use. And it reeks of the mountain. It tastes like the mountain. When you taste it, you dare. It's such an exploration of the terroir. You can create amazing things by infusing vinegar.
That's really cool because a lot of those things you just mentioned don't really make substantive foods on their own. Like there's some medicinal properties and there's flavor properties, right. But it's not like you're going to sit down to a bowl of any of those things. So it's a way to bring all those in. I'm really interested in the idea. I just think as the decades go on, we'll come to understand that diversity in your diet, that there's a genetic component, that it's important to eat the genome of lots of species. And so sometimes I think by doing something like you just mentioned, you're getting some firs and some pines and some mugworts and all these things. It's like, that's 3 extra species that day that you got into your diet. And I think down the road, we're going to understand that at the epigenetic level, these interactions, dietary interactions with other species are important, because the average American's eating, I think it's like 30 foods. It's really sad,
Wow,
30
I didn't know that.
species a year, Yeah, and you look at hunter-gatherer diets, they're like 200 to 1,000 species a year that they're eating.
Oh my, yeah. I mean, right now I'm studying like seeds and grains, and the use of seeds and grains in, hunter-gatherer was actually quite big when you look at archaeological find in Europe. When, even if you look in America, seeds and grains, you're talking, I think so far, in North America, there's probably like 200 to 300 seeds and grains that can be collected for food. Easily.
I remember you were talking about this when we last spoke. You were talking about some of this, and then I, just looking through your social media at some of the seeds and grains you've been working with. It's very fascinating to me. And recently, I did an interview with a woman who wrote a book about Cahokia. Are you familiar with that? In the middle. So Cahokia was near modern day St. Louis in the United States, but it's a mound city, and it's just been, it kind of grew over, but people are realizing, oh, those aren't just natural hills; those were big earthen pyramids, and there was a big city this is part of that Mississippian culture in the middle of the United
Okay.
States. And they had a suite of crops that they had domesticated that have gone feral again, that are but they had domesticated variants of amaranth and what do you call it, lamb's quarter and things like that. And they were gathering them
That's
as
right. I
seeds and
remember that. I
using,
remember
yeah,
reading about that.
right.
Yeah.
So you're, and I noticed like many of the seeds you're talking about are quite small.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd just be curious for you to speak to that, because I think these get overlooked in the, when you get into foraging, it seems like all these plants, but then you kind of realize real quickly, most modern day foragers are working with kind of a small suite of species that we're all pretty familiar with. But I like
Yeah.
that you're stretching the boundaries a little bit of what we think about as wild foods.
Yeah. I'm actually, and it's interesting because I'm always looking at the relationship of wildcrafting and foraging with the environment too. And those days, as I get older, and I'm also looking at wildcrafting as a way to help the environment.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking at also a lot of those invasive and non-native plants, and they're just so plentiful everywhere. But most of them can actually be used as food. In Los Angeles, I had a class, and I explained to the students, they were looking at food waste. And they were giving me example of food waste that happened in the city. And I say, guys, I don't think you understand, but the biggest food waste in Los Angeles is the non-utilization of edible wild plant that are surrounding the city. You're talking thousands of acres of wild mustard, for example, which are crops in different countries, but nobody is going to do anything with it in Los Angeles. They
Mm.
consider quote unquote weeds.
Wow.
So, it was really an epiphany for a lot of them going like, we never even thought of that, of all those invasive and non-native plants as a source of food. And you're talking like wild radish, chickweed, you know, 12 different types of mustard.
Mm.
The list goes on and on of all those plants that are actually still crops in different countries, but called weeds in America, and therefore we are not going to use them. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, you have people who cannot afford organic food, or people who cannot even afford food.
Right.
So, for me, the non-utilization of those resources is actually the biggest food waste.
Yeah, and
But
and one of the issues we face with that is and you touch on this in the book too, the environmental reclamation process sometimes involves chemically poisoning the landscape to try to eradicate
yeah,
some of these plants, which I've never been able to. It's so hard for me to understand how anybody could think putting Roundup on the plants is better than the plants being there. That's really like, I just can't get my head around that.
yeah, it's very complicated, to be honest. But so far the two solutions that are being offered are negative in my opinion. They either spraying chemicals, or is doing what you call habitat restoration. That means you're going to take those resources, uproot them, and then throw them away, which is food waste, really.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, why can't we have a program whereby, look at black mustard, for example. It makes the most incredible Dijon mustard with the seeds. You
That's
could,
where this gets interesting to me, because when you mention those plants, when you say things like chickweed and mustards, I'm picturing the edible greens, the
yeah,
meristematic part. But you're like, hey, hang on, the seeds, and
yeah.
that's where we get into territory that I think even foragers often don't really think about.
It's because I think a lot of forager thinks that it's difficult to collect seeds and grains or they're insignificant. But for example, where I have my pottery studio, in 1 hour, I collected 4 cups of tumbleweed mustard seeds that taste like hazelnuts.
Wow.
And a lot of people think that mustard, seeds taste like mustard, but that's not true. Only the black mustard or brown mustard, you know,
Hmm.
seeds will taste like wasabi. Everything else is more like nutty, hazelnuts, walnuts kind of flavor. It's incredible in drinks. It's incredible, adding that to your food. I'm going to make some lacto fermented nut cheese using some wild plant and cashew and walnuts, and I'm adding seeds, for example, for next weekend. So the incredible amount of use for seeds and grains that are really overlooked by a lot of foragers, and I think it's because one, they think it's kind of hard to collect, but two, it's also much harder to identify because when you collect the seeds, there are no more leaves. It's basically just,
Right.
it looks like a dead plant, you know.
How are you, because another thing is if you were to show somebody these mustard seeds, I mean, they are so small that if they imagined, having to pick them one at a time, that would seem like just, impossible. But I imagine you're threshing them out or something. How do you typically go about gathering these kind of seeds?
A different method. There's probably like 5 or 6 different methods that I use depending on what I collect, and I'm still learning, to be honest.
Okay.
But I definitely have a collection of strainers, like different mesh of different size.
Yeah.
Uh, I love to go to the dollar store and find out what they have. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I probably have a collection of like 8 or 9 different strainers that have different mesh size. Uh, and very often I use those. So I basically, like black mustard is super easy. The seeds are actually pretty big compared to other things. And you put everything into a paper bag or plastic bag, like you just take all those dry seed pods and then you stomp on the bag, literally stomp on it. You break down all the seed pods and then all the seeds will collect at the bottom of the bag with some chaff. And then you create a hole at the bottom of the bag and you pour out all the seeds and chaff that were collected at the bottom through the strainer, but only the seeds will go through a strainer and the chaff will stay stuck right there. It's that easy.
Yeah,
You
I
can
love it.
collect cups and cups of seeds in no time.
Wow. So with a wild vinegar and a wild mustard seed, I could be making
Yeah.
my own mustard at home. And
Oh my God, you're going back in time. You go back to doing like the 17th century,
yeah.
mustard the way it was done by using. They were using black mustard seeds. No, they're using a different one. They use Chinese mustard, if I recall, because it's always about the money. You get a
Yeah.
better yield.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were also using verjus, which is the juice of unripe berries or fruits.
Hmm.
In this case, they were using unripe grapes.
Okay.
There's a lot of use also for unripe ingredient. If you remember from the first interview we did.
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, like a vinegar substitute. When I did research on the use of unripe fruits and berries, I found out like, oh my God, there was something in the Middle Age called verjus.
Hmm.
And verjus, if you translate in French, it means green juice.
Green juice, not what people mean
Green juice.
anymore in LA when they say green juice.
Yeah, so verjus. And it was a vinegar substitute in the Middle Age. And I know they were doing it from green grapes. And I actually went to my local Middle Eastern store in Los Angeles at the time. And I found verjus, which was basically the juice of green grapes. And it was very acidic. It was kind of like between a lemon juice and a vinegar. Very
Wow.
interesting.
Oh, wow.
And then I tried to do that with wild currant. And it was an educational process. First, I used the unripe green wild currant berries. It was horrible. It was like so tannic. And I found out by doing it, I did it every 2 weeks or every week. I remember I tried to do it. And there was a sweet spot. And the sweet spot was when the currant was about to get ripe, but not quite yet.
Hmm.
So it was still sour. And I did the verjus at that point. Like I basically juiced it. And it was unbelievable. It was so good. You could totally use it as a vinegar substitute right there and then.
Okay, so you're waiting for a point where the tannins are lower,
Yeah,
but the
that's
sour's still
right.
present.
But it's not sweet yet. So this is like the
Right.
tannin is away, it's gone, but you don't have all the sugar that you get in the ripe berries yet. And there's this
Yeah.
sweet spot in between, and you basically have a week or two to make your green juice, your verjus.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up because, especially as a vinegar substitute, because when we were talking about the uses of vinegar earlier, I was thinking from a cooking perspective, acid is just one of those key, it's like fat, acid, salt. Those are like really crucial things. And And every time I cook, I got something acidic. But I don't have the ability to grow lemons and limes and citruses here in Maine. And
Right.
the only thing we have that's really sour that I, normally think of foraging would be our staghorn sumac, but the fruits are always infested with bugs. I mean, there's always an infestation. So I barely use those. But I hadn't thought about this verjus thing. I think that's a great idea. That's really cool because we have a lot of wild
Yeah.
grapes here.
And verjus can be made with apples too.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's something you can look into. I've not done it, but I know, and some of wild apples are actually very sour.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that could be an option for you, but definitely vinegar is one. In terms of use for vinegar, the amount of use, I'm just going to list a few if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
We talk about quick pickles, you have salad dressing, you have condiments. You can make your wild mustard, herb paste, unbelievable. You can do all kind of like very savory. It's one way to preserve herbs. If you think about it, it's a condiment in the same time. Kind of think of it as a wild chimichurri type of thing.
Okay.
I did a one that I call Habasco. It was actually wild chervil and habanero hot sauce. And then I fermented that, and then I added, I think if I recall, 70% vinegar, and then you age it for like a year. This is pretty much a process that Tabasco does.
Okay.
So you can make like Tabasco type hot sauce with wild plant.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and you can make some incredible hot sauce using fermented product and then vinegar, together. Jerky, mushroom jerky, meat jerky, vinegar is very often key. Pickled seeds, that's a good one. I love doing the pickled seeds. It's like caviar for me.
Okay, pickled seeds. So what kind of seeds are you talking about?
Whatever. I mean, I can give it a flavor profile. Usually I put like 40 to 50% black mustard seeds. So it's going to taste like wasabi or mustardy as a base. But then I can go nuts and I can just put anything I want to. Wild chias, lamb's quarter seeds, amaranth seeds, all 8 or 9 different kind of mustard, the one that tastes like hazelnuts. I can do whatever I want. There's like so many different combinations you can.
You get a little crunch and pop from those when you
get a crunch and pop, and then on top of it, depending on what vinegar you're going to be using, you can have some incredible flavor. You can use elderberry wine vinegar. You can use mugwort beer vinegar. So you can do a complete exploration of the terroir or your environment in terms of flavor by using local seeds and local alcohol turned into vinegar. Really? Soups. People don't think about soups. A lot of soups actually contain vinegar. Even Asian soups, like hot and sour soups, contain some kind of vinegar. Sauce, barbecue. We're talking about hot sauce. In French, you have something called aigre doux, which is used with a lot of game meat. By the way, you will be interested by that.
How do you spell that?
It's aigre doux. Let me switch to my French mind. AIGREDOUX.
All right, thank you.
And I have a recipe in the book. It's actually a type of hot and sour sauce made originally with wild berries.
Okay.
And in Belgium or France, we will be using that with rabbits and all kind of like gamey deer and game animals, including pheasants.
Wow, man, you really expand my horizons when I start talking.
But then if you think about it too, one thing that would be super important is for food preservation is canning. Mm-hmm. If you know how to make your vinegar and you can make a vinegar that has at least 5% acidity, you can actually can your food. You can can, there's a lot of canning pickle. So you can take, for example, cattle and pickle it and then can it using the water bath method and keep it for the whole year.
Because
so you can create a whole pantry.
Enough.
The what?
Because the pH is low enough.
Yes, that's right. And also, if you take a look at the recipe from the quote-unquote approved recipe from the FDA and the USDA, they're always based on 5% acidity vinegar.
Yeah.
So it's basically food safety. You start with 5% acidity. It's acidic enough. that your food will not spoil and you don't get any botulism. And a lot of I did the Master Food Preserver program at the University of California, so a lot of the recipe I use for wild food are based from inspiration of regular canning, meaning that if you can spinach, you can can lamb's quarter, you can can black mustard leaves, for example, or whatever. So it's just part of food safety, But vinegar is really key for this stuff, And the issue is, how can you know that your vinegar is actually 5%?
I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's in my book.
I haven't got that far yet. Cool. We'll let people get to the book then. Hey, I wanted to ask you. Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the ceramics you're doing. That's something. When I spoke to you last, we talked about you were really into the monomatate kind of stones, finding stones and stuff to grind with, but now I'm noticing you're doing all these ceramics, and you mentioned having your studio, and I'm fascinated to hear more about that.
Yeah. By the way, it kind of came to with the fact that I was doing a lot of, I for my books and all that, I do a lot of food and food presentation. And I was getting frustrated because I was not getting the dishware that I really liked.
Do you do your own photography?
Yeah, I do my own photography.
And is the photography I see, because your Instagram feed is beautiful, are those done with another camera, or are those done with a phone?
Usually I use like a cheap, what is it that I use? I even forget. A cheap Nikon. So It's not really, it's kind of like an in-between. It's an old one. I mean, it's like 8 years old. It's a D6600.
Okay, that looks
so it's
great.
like a $400 camera.
Okay.
And I use daylight.
Yeah.
So usually I put my stuff at the window. Yeah. Although I just bought some lights because now I'm doing a lot of pottery and I kind of need some time to have artificial light during the late, so I can do photo at night. But that's pretty new. So yeah, I don't use like really sophisticated equipment at all.
It looks fantastic, and I know what you mean. Well, first I'll say I almost never post food photos because I always cook at night and there's no light, so I'm always inspired when I see something like what you're doing. But I get what you're saying too about finding the kind of dishes and stuff you want too. So you decided to go out on your own.
I basically just decided to do it, but I'm a little bit different in the sense that I really don't have hobbies. I don't have a lot of hobbies. I do wild food, which is for me is not a hobby. It's a lifestyle. And I really like to be, if I take up a subject, I want to be a professional in it. I'm not the kind of guy that I don't want like 20 hobbies and at the end of my life look back and say, well, what did you do? I had a lot of hobbies. I want to be a professional. So I really, when I decided to go with pottery, I said, okay, I want to be a professional at it. And I didn't go to school. I'm self-taught, but I bought book on the subject, study. When I travel, I went to meet other people that I really like. And I started to study wild clay and how to deal with wild clay and how to create your own glazes. Fascinating stuff. So I'm basically creating my own pottery, dishes, pots, cups, mugs, plates, bottles using clay that I collect in the wild. And then I do my own glaze using natural ingredient. And I'm about to embark in making glaze with stones that I find in the wild and clay that will melt at high temperature. I'm having a blast. This is like such an interesting subject too.
Wow, that's fascinating. Are you selling that stuff as well?
Yeah, they sell very well. Actually, I was amazed. It's such a surprise. I end up, it's kind of like one of my income source is to actually sell the pottery, but I think they are unique in the sense that, because I didn't go to school and I kind of knew what I wanted. So I kind of like had to invent the technique to achieve what I wanted. And so the pottery has kind of a unique look at this point. I don't process my clay, so you have you still have all the rocks and everything in it.
Cool.
And so it's kind of a difficult and lengthy way of doing it, but I don't care about that. But the end result, if you go on Instagram, the icon is called Wildcrafted Ceramics.
Oh, you have a separate page for that?
Yeah, I do a separate page for
I'll
that.
give that a follow today. Wildcrafted.
Yeah, Wildcrafted Ceramic, and you'll see it's really, it's kind of different. A lot of my inspiration is actually from prehistoric. Originally, was from prehistoric pottery from Europe.
Okay, so you're looking at archaeological finds.
Yeah, but not the sophisticated kind. I'm looking for the thing they don't show into museum, which are the one that people would have done in their home.
Right.
And usually you don't see those because they don't they don't look like a specific style that was, like the beaker style in, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Those were people making stuff at home. So they look, sometimes like a lot of people are inspired by Japanese pottery, like they call it wabi-sabi. Those were definitely wabi-sabi. Like some of them you look at it, you go like, wow, that's like crude, but it's useful. There's a rough, raw aesthetic to it that I really, really like.
It's like a working class pottery, like the thing.
It's
that's
a
really
working
meant to
class
be used.
pottery. It's effective. It's meant to. It's meant to. I actually use twigs and I use pine pitch in my pottery to attach handles. I use stone in the pottery as if I do a teapot, the cover of the teapot is actually a stone and some moss in between.
Wow. Oh yeah, I was looking at something, a fermentation vessel. And
yeah, exactly.
And you sort of had a lid tied down with, it looked like, I don't know if it was plant fibers that you had used to make cordage and tie it down. It just had such a, in the photography, it's just beautiful. It looks amazing.
Yeah,
it looked
so
like
I do crazy
moss
shit.
Or something up top.
Yeah, I do crazy shit because I can, and I don't, and it's whimsical and at the same time. I've kind of like, I'm creating, as I get older, I'm kind of creating my own universe.
Yeah, that's how it feels.
Based on wild food and plant and stone and sticks. It's basically, it's becoming more artistic and kind of like creating with what nature is giving you, including making fibers and peppers from plants and using, I do some mugs and instead of putting a handle, I use like stinging nettle cordage, for example.
Yeah.
Because I can.
Really fun.
I don't have any rules. I'm not trying to show off. I'm not trying to be known or to have an exhibit. I'm just doing what I love. There is like no, there's no specific goals. But guess what? I have a waiting list now. I have people waiting going like, please put more pottery. And I'm like, really?
Yeah. Well, that's the real art is when somebody's doing what's in their heart, not what they think they should be doing.
I'm so thankful to people, though. I managed to make a living doing what I love, and I could not do it without the support of people.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely thankful. Like even with the pottery, I'm going like, wow, those guys are like absolutely awesome. That's. Yeah.
Well, when you think about like your ability to make a living is sort of a reflection of the value you put into the world too. So it's like you're putting a lot of value in, and people appreciate.
I guess
that,
I don't.
You're unmoored now.
I try.
Did you say you've got an RV? You're living in an RV now?
I'm semi-nomadic. I spent a whole year in an RV, and I learned in the process. So last year I was traveling all year long. But one of the problems I got in the RV was actually production. And be able to produce. So even in the RV, I was not able to do what I had if I had like some kind of like place where I can store things. And I realized that, it took me a year to realize that. But like, for example, pottery, you need a kiln, or you can make fire. Some of the pottery I use wood firing. But I have a wheel too, and I travel with all that once. The RV was like full of stuff, But I was traveling with a kiln. I was traveling with a kiln too. I had a tiny kiln,
Wow.
And it was just getting too difficult. So I went back to California for the winter. And then a friend of mine, I was actually like camping on a property that's owned by a friend of mine. It's called Angeles Crest Creamery. And she basically said, hey, you know what? We have this, you know, place that, my mom used to live in. It's very small, but she was sick at the time. And, so I took care of her. You can rent that if you want. And, maybe it would be perfect for what you want to do. And it was perfect. There is one section that is used for pottery, and there is another section that is, it was a very basic kitchen that was used to make yogurt from goat cheese.
They were fermenting in there already.
Yeah. So, and it was also like an industrial sink, like
Yeah,
three-part
right.
sink.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is perfect, fantastic. So I'm basically just renting the stuff, and I still live in my RV, and then I have the ability to travel because it's pretty inexpensive. There's not like all the accommodation that you get in a regular apartment or stuff. Although you even have a shower and a bathroom there.
Yeah.
But it was perfect for me, and it's big enough for me to produce. And I can even do classes like having like 8 people or even up to 10 people showing up. So I can do some of the class in the mountain, or I can drive to Los Angeles and give classes over there using the RV. So it's kind of like semi-nomadic living at the time. Right now I'm in Colorado. I'm going to be going to Texas. So I don't know what I'm doing. I'm leaving.
It sounds like you're having a beautiful life. It really does. It sounds
It's
gorgeous.
okay. Yeah.
Well,
It's okay. Sometimes like you end up in RV living is not always fantastic either. I mean, I got stuck in the snow for like a month.
Where?
I mean, like you can even open the door type of thing
Where
with
were you?
no internet. I was in Utah, and then I ended up in California. I managed to escape, and then I ended up in the biggest storm of California on top of a mountain, and I got 3 feet of snow, and I could not get out. I could not get out. And I got stuck in my RV box for 3 weeks. No internet, no phone,
You couldn't
just
get out of
books.
the actual RV?
No.
Really?
I mean, it's 3 feet of snow. So I did manage to get out, by the way. I went out through the window and cleaned up. But I could not drive the RV, and I'm
Yeah.
miles away from everybody.
And you have no internet. So good. Oh man.
Yeah, so and I had clay, so I managed to do pottery. I was going stir crazy,
Right.
But I was laughing in the same time, and
Yeah,
at the time I still had a cat with me, and my cat was like, "Jesus Christ, this is so boring,"
Oh man, I think there's a lot
Anyway,
of people going to hear this and sort of envy the freedom of what you're talking about, even if you get
yeah,
stuck.
yeah, but you also have loneliness. Sometimes you can, sometimes I don't see anybody for like 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Wow.
You know,
Really? Huh?
and you live in an environment. It's like the mountain. You just have wind and trees
Yeah.
and California, and there used to be a wildfire. So it's in 2020. So it's basically a burned forest too locally. And some of it is not burned too, but it's rough, it's harsh during the winter. It's snow, and then you see nobody. So it can be interesting.
I didn't realize. I kind of thought you were. I thought your teaching was such that you wouldn't get that much alone time. So I didn't realize you had a bit of a hermitage like that.
Well, guess what? A lot of my class, because of the pandemic, were using Zoom.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
So no, I'm not. I don't have to do live classes. I've actually
Yeah.
not done. I've done 2 live classes in 2 years.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
A-
Oh, no kidding.
And and Zoom is the perfect platform for me to learn to teach what I'm doing. It's perfect for teaching fermentation.
Why is that?
And I have a satellite now, so I use Starlink, so I can be in the
Oh,
mountain
wow. No
and
kidding.
and use my satellite and actually do a Zoom class.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and it's fascinating because half of my public is from Europe, the Middle East, and up to China.
Oh, wow. No kidding.
I could not believe it. Like the first time I did my first Zoom class, I sold out in like 40 minutes.
Wow. So this whole time that was like sort of an untapped market for you of people in all these
It
places.
it was suddenly, and that's where I realized I was able to move because in LA I was like stuck in LA. I could not give live classes because of the pandemic. And then suddenly Zoom opened this new universe, and I basically just say, don't have to stay there.
Yeah. I'm glad
I
you're
can
out of
travel.
LA.
I can learn stuff. I can meet other people. And that's pretty much what I did. You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm doing my damnedest to stay out of LA as much as possible.
But you know, where I was, well, I'm really outside of LA, to be honest.
Yeah.
And one of the realization I had while I was traveling is that, you know, Southern California is a paradise for a forager. It is.
Yeah,
The
definitely.
diversity and the amount is just unbelievable.
Mhm.
It's everywhere, and it's a big city. Therefore, you have a lot of invasive and non-native plant. And to some degree, I told that to somebody else, like who was doing an article in a magazine. I can tell the ethnicity of a city by looking at the wild food that is growing in the city.
Wow, I've never thought about that. That's brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah, people
you know,
bring
Los
things from
Angeles,
home.
like majority becomes European, you know, because those people will import stuff from their own country, like
Mhm.
to plant, like fields and stuff like that. But when they import the culture, you know, the grain and all that, they also import the weeds, and then you end up you know, having those weeds taking over the environment.
Yeah, it's like
So in
horrendous.
LA,
Yeah.
yeah, in LA you get, you know, European white, and then you get a little bit of Jewish, Middle Eastern plants after that, like mallow and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, curly duck, Armenia. Uh, and then you go down and you go to a little bit of Asians, you know, so you keep going down and you kind of get an approximate demographic by looking at the non-native and invasive plant and the amount of it and where they come from. It's interesting.
Wow. You're a really, really interesting person. Many things you say that are like I've never thought about. It's just it's refreshing. I appreciate it.
I'm a nerd.
I don't know about that. What's on the horizon for you? What's next?
But you know, I don't know. I'm kind of like, this is interesting because this lifestyle, semi nomadic lifestyle has introduced so many changes in my life that I don't have a lot of plans. The immediate plan for me is I have 3 books project I could write.
Okay.
I'm like, okay, I could write 3 books. Uh, and I'm fascinated right now by seeds and plants, seeds and grains, wild seeds and grains. So I think it probably will be the next one because, again, seeds and grain is not something that is very common for foragers.
Yeah, we
Uh,
there's a hole in the literature there. I would love
yeah,
it if you'd write that book. It would fill that gap. I mean, it'd be great.
yeah, and again, it would be from a culinary perspective, like flavors too, not just survival.
Yeah.
Um, and all the creative things you can do with seeds and grains, you know, from a culinary perspective. Uh, Maybe one with wild clay in the future.
Yeah. That'd be also great.
But again, it's so interesting because I never went to school. I never learned really, you know, I'm self-taught. So if there was a book, you know, originally I say, well, I cannot write a book because I really don't know shit on the subject, really, you know, to be honest. But somebody said, no, you could write a book about your method and the way you approach things.
Yeah.
And that could be a very different book because the way you did it ended up, because you self-taught, and the way you did it ended up to be very different.
Right. And
And
it
I'm like,
sounds like
yeah, I can,
you're doing it differently than how
yeah,
somebody who, because that's the thing. I'm also an autodidact and I have very little professional training. And so the way I approach things is always different. And then that
yeah,
yields different results. And sometimes that's how you get innovation. So
yeah.
I think you should, you know, write that book because it'd be different than anything somebody who's trained would produce.
And I think if you have an artistic mind, you're going to give it an artistic slant. You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of like the
Right.
way it is. You know, I mean, I just have a high school diploma on my side. I never went to college or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, so everything, and I ended up being in art school. So I do know art because in Belgium you can actually do art school. You know, in high school.
Oh,
So the
neat.
last 3 years, you know, was basically art school, and I learned how to paint, do photography, and all this stuff. You know,
Well,
in
it's
art
nice that you're
in high
using it.
school.
It's nice that it's come around and you can use that.
It comes around, and I'm using it totally for what I do. But
Right.
I mean, for whatever reason, I've always been able to learn extremely fast. I mean, in the year 2000, I used to do virtual reality.
Really?
Yeah, I used to be a programmer.
Wow.
I was one of the pioneer of virtual reality on the internet. I,
Okay, I
I,
had no
create,
idea.
I created
Wow.
one of the first city on the internet where you will shop with virtual bodies. Like the
Whoa.
metaverse. I was working on the
Working on the
metaverse
metaverse.
in 97, and I mean, I quoted it, like we were working on the metaverse in 97. It was way early, you know.
Wow. I was thinking about back then because I was remembering recently I think it might have been a Stephen King movie, Lawnmower Man, came out.
Yeah,
And that was like
yeah,
when I
yeah, yeah.
first got exposed to the idea of virtual reality. And at that time, it felt like, oh, this is coming really soon. And then there's been like, decades go by and you don't hear anything. And now it's kind of coming back and we're starting to see it again.
Yeah, 97. It was interesting. I thought the metaverse would be created. I think my mind was working faster than the way things were going on the internet, and
Right.
I thought that within 2 or 3 years we will be like living in a virtual environment, with virtual bodies, and it will be very common. And that was in 97, but the computer power was not there. The technology didn't move fast enough. But it's getting to a point where it's getting there. With social media, video, I mean, we used to use helmet at the time too. The company doesn't exist anymore, but we were working with a company called Cybermax. I look back at it; it was very crude, but my God, it was getting there. We had like what 9 million people.
Really?
Yeah, it was not
Wow.
small. We spent millions
Wow.
of dollars at the time.
What are your feelings on all of it now that I mean, here you are now, you're you're making your own vinegars and harvesting mustard
Yeah,
seeds and working with
yeah,
wild clay, living like in a hermitage in the mountains, and here we are sort of barreling towards this coming what could almost be described as another world, like in the way that
yeah,
Europeans were like, oh, there's another half of the world. It's like we're kind of heading into something like a whole new
yeah,
territory. But at the same time, since 97, when you were involved in that,
yeah,
it's really in the last decade, we've watched what social media has
yeah.
done to our minds. It's like, wow, it's not all upside. So how do you view all that now as we're getting closer and, we're seeing this metaverse, people are buying real estate in the metaverse. So it's there.
Yeah. Right, yeah, they were doing that already in my town. We actually created the first apartment and the first housing and the first object
Wow.
created by people, and the first economy too. It
Wow.
was interesting. But anyway, I have mixed feeling, meaning by that I don't see technology is not inherently bad. It's always what do you do with it?
Yeah. Making vinegar is a
Uh,
technology, right?
Making vinegar is a technology. It's my biggest problem is what I see right now with technology. It's always about the money, and it's a very capitalistic world, and it's all about making a profit, and it's not. When I was doing it, it was at the time, and it was the beginning of the internet. We were still dreamers. We were still one way to look at the internet on how to help people and make a better world and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and connecting
Altruistic.
people. Altruistic, and no, it's really you see it. It's really about the money, and you know, social media is not for everybody. Social media can be positive for some people, and some social media can be very negative, and for some people, it's can be very addictive even for some people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't spend a lot of time on social media, to be honest. I post my stuff. I follow a few people. Um, but I don't spend that much time on social media.
Well,
It will
you
be,
can't create like you're creating and be
I
on there
can't.
all the time, right? That's what's weird is you have like a class of creators and then a class of
Yeah,
consumers, and I don't know how
but
sustainable.
here's a good example of what's happening that's creating a problem with me, which is bittersweet. Instagram is really changing right now, and
Yeah, I know. I miss it.
they are kind of becoming like TikTok a little bit, where they're
The
trying
reels
to
and
really
everything.
push. Yes, and I'm not doing real so
Me
far.
either. I love photography and I love to write about the photography. And the quality of the videos that people are making are so low, and I always liked high quality photography with high quality writing. So I don't want to do this TikTok low quality video where I act all crazy and try to get some attention. That's
Well,
like
you don't have to,
nauseating to
I
me.
mean, you don't have to do that. I mean, meaning that you can be yourself. But what's interesting is, you know, it's the allegorism actually against you. And I see, if you make a living from social media, and I do, I'll be honest, meaning by that people buy books by looking at what I do. People, do Zoom classes because of what I do and the way I present myself on social media. So suddenly right now I'm in a situation where the algorithms are really against me, going like, well, you're still posting picture, you're not going to get as many people as used to.
Hmm.
And meanwhile, you see other people, we do video, and their new followers is shooting up like crazy.
Yeah, right.
And this is planned. So you basically go like, the company is saying you have to play by our rules. And if you don't play by our rules, you will be penalized. And right now, our rules is we are going video, baby. You better get used to it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it and say, do I want to do it or do I want to and I still don't know. I may do it, I may not do it. But if I do it, it will be my own video, which may or work or not. There is all kind of different range of videos. Some, funny videos, some video a bit more nuts, some video are more educative. It's all over the place. There's a lot of cut and paste type of video that I don't always like how to do things with music. Anyway, I'm just looking. When I have, this is the way I look at things when I have something like adversity, and I call that adversity is, you know, at this point, this is putting me in a situation where I have to make a choice. Either I play the game or I don't. But I'm always looking like, okay, how can I use that to my advantage?
Hmm. Yeah.
Meaning by that, how can I use this problem and turn it into something positive? Like I remember, I think we talked about it in the Well-Crafted Cuisine. I got sick when I was 55 and I didn't have the same energy that I used to have and go hiking and foraging all day long. So writing book was another outlet
Yep.
because, so writing book, for example, was an outlet because I started aging and my health started changing, which is fine. We all age, we all get older. I'm 62. It's even worse than when I was 55. But
Yeah.
for example, I have Zoom classes, you know,
Right. Yeah.
so you can always find positive solution, I think. And I'm looking at this social media and say, well, how can I use it and still be true to myself, be
Right.
not compromising with my own standard, and still create something that will be of interest to people and work within the whatever Meta or Instagram wants to go to. So it's not that you have to do a compromise. You can actually look at it and go like, okay, I can play the game and be creative with it and do it my way in the positive way, I guess.
I was recently with Sam Thayer in Wisconsin, and he's never been on social media,
Yeah,
and then now he's on TikTok. And I thought that's really funny. Here's this guy; he's been sort of one of the best known foragers in the country, and but he's never been that accessible via the internet. And then he jumps on and he goes right to TikTok. It just made me laugh, But I watched him because he was
yeah,
making videos and his daughter was helping, and so I'm watching him do it, and he was having a blast. Like how I felt
yeah,
about Instagram when I first got on Instagram. I loved it.
yeah,
I've gotten a little
yeah,
bit
me
tired
too.
of it, but I loved it. And I
Yeah,
was like, oh, he's loving it. And then I was like, okay, it sort of inspired me. I was like, oh, maybe I could
yeah,
do something like that, because he was like a kid just watching him have a blast with it. So because he didn't know the other format, he had never done that other format. So there was no
right.
change for him. It was just, that was novelty. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, trying not to be that, cantankerous old person who's always resisting change, but I do.
No, you can embrace change, and I mean you have to. I think. I mean, I know a friend of mine is older, and he wrote like many books, probably like 10 books about foraging, but he's not on social media, and if he had learned how to be on social media and how to play with it, and be himself. I think it's important to be yourself when you're on social media and create the way you want to create. It probably would have helped him tremendously. it is one way to publicize yourself. It is definitely one way to expand, what you do. I think it's important. I mean, you can decide not to play the game, but it's becoming difficult. How do you make a
Yeah.
living?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. No, you have to. I mean, it'd be very hard to
it would be
be,
very hard.
yeah, any kind of business. I think it'd be challenging not to.
But on the other side, I go sometime on YouTube and I see video about foraging, and I see like this guy who has like 750,000 views on his video, and I don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
Never heard of the guy.
Yeah.
And it just happened, he did like 3 videos and he's getting so much following, and I'm like, wow. And I've never done YouTube, for example.
Yeah.
I've actually never done really video to think that's probably like my problem is I've done photos because that's what I know.
Yeah. You
No
also, though,
video.
like, what would you say about having, because you have hard copy books. That's like something
Right.
really real, right? It's like,
Right.
like tomorrow, like there's a fire and the servers go down. It's like your
Yep.
account blinks out and all that's gone, but your
Yep.
books are real.
Right.
So, in a way, the social media is a way to point people back to something, because a lot of people's businesses are 100% virtual, and
Yep. Totally.
you're
Yep.
sort of
But
using
if
it
I
to
did,
point back to reality too.
well, I don't know if you know that, but was it 4 months ago I got hacked and I lost my Instagram account.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Wow.
It was devastating in the sense that I suddenly lost, I literally lost my Instagram account. Somebody took over. It was a group of people, probably from Russia, I think.
Oh no.
Crypto spam. I still don't know how they managed to do it. I mean, they attacked me from every places to get in. It was like fake message they were getting in my bank account. I mean, I got attacked by email and everywhere, everywhere.
Wow.
And somehow they got in. And once they're in, I'm still very small for Instagram. There was like no way to get help. Right there, I was going like, what am I going to do? I had 105,000 followers at the time, and they were dwindling every day, and they basically removed every single picture that I had and started putting crypto shit and using me saying like I invested in crypto and like really nasty shit.
Oh no.
Yeah, and that lasted for 2 weeks, dude. And there was no solution for me. I was about to restart a new account,
Oh, because you can't
and I
just
got
call someone up at any of these companies. I mean, whether it's
I
Facebook or,
try.
yeah, we try all the time with my business constantly. There's no one,
Yeah.
no human to talk to.
And you know what happened? He was a fan of me, of my stuff that works at Meta, who actually saved the day.
Oh wow,
He
that's
he
serendipitous.
found out that I was hacked, and he did it because he was right there. He actually
Wow,
saved my
lucky.
account, so I'm so
Oh,
thankful, to him.
did you get your images back up and
I
everything?
got no, but it's not too bad
Okay.
in the
Wow.
sense that I managed to save. I had like 1,500 images. I think I managed to save like 500.
Wow, okay. Whew.
But if you think about it, now I have 1,000 pictures I can repost.
That's true. That's a good point.
It's true.
Wow. Wow.
So
You
there's
know,
always a positive. There's always a positive. See, I can if I if I have days where I have nothing to post, I can still repost stuff. But
yeah.
it was an interesting, going back to that. It's true that one of the promised technologies we don't realize is it can go all the way at any time. There is no memories. There is no, you can lose, and there's so many hacking done on Instagram right now. It's not funny. I get people contacting me going like, how did you do it? What happened? And I'm like, I can't really help you. It's just, I don't even know exactly the person who did it. Somebody did it over there. Somebody helped me. I know it's a he. I got a first name, but that's it.
You don't know also what created the vulnerability or what vulnerability they exploited?
I'm not sure exactly.
Oh, that's hard to know, right? Hard not to know.
It was so happening all at once. And I think I got targeted because I just hit like 100,000 a
Right.
few
Okay.
days ago.
Okay. So
So you become a
that makes you
target
a
because
target.
I think so.
Oh,
And I
wow.
mean, it went through emails, even on my iPhone.
Oh,
Like my alert were going on text messages going like, somebody is trying to access your Amazon account.
oh,
Click here with your password. You see what I mean?
yeah.
And it all happened like nonstop for like an hour. And it was like, it's the most confusing thing. And you kind of, I mean, I guess I did a mistake somewhere. I'm just not sure. The biggest mistake I've done, though, is I didn't have several layers of protection, which I now have.
Like, what are those layers that you now have?
For example, I have, definitely like if you go into my account, there is a message that goes into my phone and say, in order to get your PayPal, here is the code that comes from blah, blah, blah. So there's like different layers through different, going through my phone or different password or some stuff called authenticators.
Yeah.
Where it's basically a little app that will give you a code the code will be only valid for like 20 seconds if you try to access something. So every time somebody is accessing or try to access one of my account email or whatever, I immediately know it on my phone.
Okay.
And from there I can decide, well, it's me or it's not me, therefore it is somebody else.
So those, you said those are called authenticators. If I wanted to find something,
authenticators, and I mean, I'm sure there's some jargon to it. It's so funny. I used to be like a pioneer of virtual reality, and
right.
I'm really falling behind.
You've been focused on other things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, something I've talked a lot about on the podcast over the years, I don't talk about it often, but something that's come up over the years is this idea that I just think we need to be fit for the environment, the wild environment, but we need to be fit for the built environment. And more, we need to be fit for this virtual environment as well. It's like, you need to be able to operate in all three. And sometimes, my wife's a teacher. She works privately now with individual students, but that means we interact with a lot of homeschool students. And sometimes you see kids where you think like, man, they're not getting enough. I understand a parent's desire to keep their kid out of the virtual world as much as possible, but you could also see the disadvantage of not knowing how to operate there, or families that sometimes are so nature-based that they don't bring their kids into the built environment enough. And you think, wow, not socialized enough for that environment. It's going to actually be hard for them later. So, and obviously the most glaring and obvious one is most people have no fitness for the wild environment. And hence why the kind of work you and I do is growing in popularity as the virtual world becomes more and more of a sort of the dominant space. And so, I think being able to operate in all three is the secret to kicking ass in the future,
Yeah, I think the issue is I think the whole idea and the secret is achieving balance between everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Between technology and as an individual, but also as a society, the balance between, culture and social media and nature and, it's really not a world that is in balance right now. It's, the more I get older, the more I realize it's all about the money and money and money and money. We live really, this whole capitalistic system is just, I can't stand it anymore.
Yeah.
And the more I get older, the worse it gets. All this system works, and we are effectively destroying the world because of this system that is in place. Where making money is more important than anything else. And the world has been set up on a system of money. If you don't have the money, you cannot survive, and it's just crazy.
Isn't it
doesn't have to be that way.
When you follow it back, you're like, how did this start? And you start looking back through history, and you realize it kind of starts with the domestication of food. And then you're like, it's like, oh wow, it's agriculture. This whole thing has been about agriculture. And then you're like, well, what's the alternative? And it's like wild food. And it's like, oh, well, that's what I'm into. Good. All right. It's just, it's so simple in a way that I think like the average person looks at the amount of chaos and complexity and can't imagine it's something that simple. Like, it's like, oh, it's growing food.
It is true. But at the same time, it's complicated now because, when I was traveling, I really realized that one of the main guilty for destroying the environment is agriculture. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking about the little farm. I'm not talking like the big agro. And I remember going to Minnesota, and I think I drove for like 7 hours, and the only thing I was doing was driving through cornfield.
Yeah.
I mean, cornfield, 7 hours of driving at 65 miles an hour in an RV. There was nothing left of the original environment. Nothing, zero, nothing. And, it was a shock to me. I was like, not even like weeds, not even like
Right.
you will not even touch the weeds that existed because you know what they spray on the stuff.
Yes, exactly.
It, and it was just a shock. But in the same time, look at the population we have on this planet. It's how do we feed all those people?
Right.
It's a very complicated subject now, and wildcrafting and foraging will never be valuable or viable. Sorry for the amount of people that we have.
Not for this number of people, no way.
No, but again, 99.99999% of the population has zero interest into foraging.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still going to be a niche, and I think we are going to do well because we're going to be in that part of that niche, and we can be very creative with with that with that niche. And I think one of our role will also to remind people that we can actually work in a positive way with the environment. Because right now the trend is really for a lot of environmentalists is to turn nature into a museum and go, you cannot touch it. And I think if we do that, that's the wrong way to do it. I think the key is to teach people how to interact in a positive way with the environment and how to make a positive impact by even using wildcrafting or foraging as a tool. The real problem, even in foraging, that gives a bad name to foraging is always the money also. It's people, foraging ramps and fiddleheads and morels and huge quantity of mushroom for money. And those people are not foraging or wildcrafter. They're basically people who know what, ramps looks like. And I've seen it in Maine. I mean, I've seen it in Maine. I was in Maine. I've seen tracks of people. They just come off the track, they rape the land, they come back, leave, and they sell that on the market.
Yeah.
You will show another plant to those people and say, "What is that?" They will go like, "I have no clue."
We
But
laugh
that gives a
sometimes
bad name
because
to food.
where I harvest my ramps, there are fiddleheads, and the commercial foragers come in there to take the fiddleheads. They don't know they're walking on ramps. If they did,
Yeah.
sure they would take those too, but they don't know.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
in a, you know what I mean? It's interesting. They're like kind of like the gold rush. It's like miners, But
Yeah, it's money. It's a frigging money.
yeah.
That's destroying the world. That's why I don't sell stuff. I mean, I sell pottery, but I will never sell plants or product like that. I don't want to.
Being involved in the hunting and fishing side, it's interesting to watch because we almost lost so many species here because they could be sold into the market. And then there was a big change, in conservation where they couldn't be sold into the market anymore. And then that's where we kind of get the modern day hunt, which has worked pretty well to restore our animal populations. But then you look at the fishery, you can sell into the market. And so now we're faced with these challenges, nationally and internationally with, the populations of fish in the ocean. And of course we lost some species, like we lost the passenger pigeon, which a lot of people like to eat,
That's right.
So it's like finding these balances. Cause I think the other extreme, like you're talking about that sort of Agenda 2030 World Economic Forum kind of perspective where they want people to live in, smart cities and not interact with nature. Well, it's like, that's the other extreme where if you don't know any of these species, they don't exist to you. And if they don't exist to you, you don't care anymore. And that seems just as bad, maybe worse. So, we don't know yet what that would look like. It's never happened before, but
I mean, I've seen it in LA, living in Los Angeles. When I was living in Los Angeles, I was there for 15 years, and I lost miles of foraging ground because of trash, because of urban expansion. The pollution is unbelievable. I mean, this is like I don't see that in Colorado. I don't see that, but like in a place like Los Angeles, people go and enjoy nature, and then they leave their trash there, and then it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Even nearby, when I in the mountain, which you will think is pristine, there's a stream there. So during the summer, people go over there with their kids and play. And at the end of the summer, it's trash everywhere. I mean, we are like worse than pigs as a, it's just like, oh my God, why?
Yeah.
How can you enjoy nature and leave your trash?
Yeah.
It just makes no sense to me.
It's like a reflection of somebody's internal world though too, it's like,
Yeah,
it's like very hard for people to meditate because when they sit down it's just trash in their head. And they
I
send them
know.
out to nature and what happens just like trash, it's just like leaking out of us,
Yeah,
oh man.
yeah. It's like every time I go foraging, I have to pick up trash. It's just like, ah,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's gross. It's
it
just,
is, it is.
and I wish, I look at all the brands of company and all that. I wish those company could be sued for those products
Oh yeah,
that
for their
end
products
up.
that are left behind.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
because those cheap bags and stuff like that, those will stay in the environment for a very, very long time.
yeah, it's so true. I mean, some
Yeah,
of the stuff will last forever. Yeah, I
yeah, I
it's
know.
challenging with doing the TV show that I do, because just like with good photography, if there's like some garbage there, you don't want that in the frame because it. But I don't want to present a fake reality where everything's
Right.
pristine all the time, or some of these survival shows that look so real, they're being filmed right on the side of the highway. I mean, it's fake.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
And
know.
I don't
Believe
want to
you.
do that, right? But at the same time,
Yeah.
it's like I want the show to be beautiful, and I don't want there to be Coke bottles and styrofoam
I
coolers and stuff,
know. I
So
know.
it's always like a game of trying to get the right angles where you crop out the stuff that is this unfortunate reality. But yeah, I mean, we're there's no it's not it's interesting too because I'm watching sort of there are global efforts underway to make tremendous changes, but a lot of those
Yeah.
global efforts also look really totalitarian and unpleasant, and it's hard to know. I get confused about this because it's like
Do,
trying to
do,
understand.
do you know?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I came up with the conclusion is I'm not an activist, to be honest. It has never been part of my personality to be like an activist.
Well,
But in the same
I
time,
define an activist as a person who wants to work on your problems but not their own.
uh, no, but for me, I see my role more like, I'm a teacher. I kind of educate people. And, you know, uh, part of my book, and I think you see that message in all the books that I have, is, how can we, I give the message in my book, how can we work with the environment and looking at solutions and stuff like that. And I think it's a way of life. And I'm not, I know I'm not going to change the world. I'm not, I'm just little me with billions of people around me. But what I can do is plant a seed, and
Mhm.
and I think I'm a seed planter. I plant little seeds in people's head, and maybe that can go somewhere. Like one time, I had somebody from the city council of Los Angeles that came to my class, and she was blown away when I was talking about all those invasive and seeds and grains, and she was like, "Oh my God!" She had this epiphany. We're surrounded by food; it's everywhere, and we don't do anything with it. I
Mhm.
want to go back to the city council and talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing came out of it, and on top of it, the pandemic happened like 2 weeks later. Who knows? But that's kind of like what I see my role is I plant seeds in people's head through my class or through my books, and who knows what can happen? Or somebody can pick up that little seed and say, "Well, I can take that seed and make something else, and plant more seeds of something."
Yeah.
And I'm happy with that. I'm not changing the world, but I think I'm doing my little impact, even if it's a tiny impact, is better than no impact or a negative impact. I think I'm trying to do a positive impact.
That's how I see it
And
too.
I'm a,
I agree because
yeah,
I think like one thing I like to pick on activists. Just I think it's fun. I'm just having fun with it. But sometimes what happens with activists is they're so angry that it's like, well, what are you really putting out there? Because now you're rippling a lot of anger out and discomfort out into the world too, and that can have negative consequences. So to me, it seems like you and you can't take on all the issues, you know what I mean? You got to like just pick like
right.
what can I work on and act like you
Yeah,
said before. It's like you could take on 20 hobbies, but you're only going to go so far in them unless you
yeah,
narrow it down. So it's like you pick your thing, you stay in your lane to the degree you can, and you further that, and you
Right.
contribute that to the world. And I think sometimes that's a lot more valuable. So that's how I see it too. It's like, I'm just going to keep sharing, promoting, but also trying to keep my spirit clean from anger and hate. And, cause all these things, I mean, they're really frustrating, and if I spend
Yeah.
too much time with them, I start to become a force of negativity too. Now I'm getting angry
Yeah.
at drivers. I'm getting angry at clerks. I'm become annoying to be around, and then
Yeah.
I'm not spreading light, So it's like important, I think, for people to figure out what can they do to contribute, and just kind of keep doing that, and don't feel like you've
Yeah.
got to take on the world's problems,
Yeah. And then make if you, I mean, my God, if everybody on earth was doing, striving to make a positive impact,
Mm-hmm.
there you go. I mean, the
Yeah,
world would be a completely different place,
that's it. That's it, man. It's been great
But
talking to you, dude. It's been great catching up. I just love what you're doing. I mean, every aspect,
yeah,
the ceramics,
think
the books, the classes, the living in the RV out in the mountains. I'm
I'm, I'm, ki-
inspired. I'm
I'm
inspired.
kind of creating my own little universe and creating my own life, really.
Yeah, well, good, man. You deserve
And
it,
it's not
but
always,
it's not like narcissistic, like you said. You're giving back, So it's like maybe it's your own little universe, but other people are benefiting from it too.
yeah, and it's not always easy either. I'm 62. I'm still figuring out what my life will be. It's, sometimes you look, it's so funny. Sometimes you look at your life and then you look at other people and your life is so different. You go like, wow, all those people have like my age, they retire, they have a home, they have like all this stuff. They have debts too.
Right.
And but look and I look at my life, I'm like so different. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I cannot say is it good, is it bad?
Right.
It's
That
it's just
comparison
me, I
game is
guess.
toxic, right? It's like you just gratitude for your own life, you know what I mean, is so important,
I,
because you look at other people's lives, and you can always find people. It's like there's always
yeah,
somebody bigger,
exactly.
faster, stronger. There's always somebody weaker, slower, and so
Yeah,
it's like you're just who you are, and you just focus on your world. I think because it's hard, you said like everything's about money, and one of the best ways to sell things is to make people compare themselves to other people, and then that makes them want to buy
yeah,
these commodities, right? So staying out of
yeah,
that as much as we can, and just staying focused on ourselves, and
yeah,
my wife is just constant reminder to me, like, stay focused on your work, like, don't,
yeah,
you know what I mean? It's kind of like, that saying, we say it a lot, but people don't think about what it means. People go like, mind your own business. It's like a pretty brilliant saying, like, in a way, you know what I mean? Like, take care of your work. And I just think that's one of the best things we can do. And comparing to other people is always a recipe for
yeah,
lack of
totally. I mean,
satisfaction.
it's part of human nature. It's so interesting, and it was a crazy year. To finish, also I ended up with COVID, and I got really sick too.
Oh, you did,
And
huh?
I'm also like, yeah, and I'm also dealing with a long-term COVID, like
Oh, no
inflammation and
kidding.
stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's all like it's been like an interesting 2 years to say the least. You
Yeah.
know,
Wow.
it's it's doing better. I'm doing better and all this stuff, but it has had quite some impact too in the same time.
Wow. Geez,
Uh,
we'll say some
so
prayers for your health around here, man. I didn't realize. Yeah, I've got COVID twice now, and it wasn't fun. I didn't, I've been lucky, but it was an ass kicker. That's for sure.
that was interesting. I ended up with like inflammation on my side, and I'm still dealing with it. Although it's getting better, but I really had to change my diet more toward very, very, very. I mean, my diet is pretty normal, just so you know. Depending on the time of the year, it could be like 20% wild food. But a lot of the wild food was used for my classes, really, or even for my Zoom
Right.
class.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but yeah, I had to change my diet to like very, very natural, organic food. And it makes a big difference and a lot more juicing, for example.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not, some people think I'm vegan or vegetarian, but I'm not. I could eat anything. Um, but a lot of my post is actually more, I guess, vegetarian because that's growing up in LA. That was most of my public, so I kind of ended up that way.
Yeah. Living in LA too.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's very vegetarian vegan in LA.
Yeah.
But I'm not personally. I'm not,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But
Well,
anyway,
eating better is a kind of a blessing in disguise. So, I mean, long term.
People forget that food and wild food is part of it, but food is definitely like the original medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you
food that is medicine.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Oh, Pascal.
Okay,
man.
sir.
I want to try to get out there with you sometime if you're willing to come on the TV show and do an episode with us, man. I would just love to feature.
Oh, you want to put me on TV? No.
I would like to. Hey, you said you wanted to do video.
If I do video, I don't know if I'm going to put myself in the video.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Why
I
not?
like what you said about doing it the way you want to do it, and so that's a good idea.
Come on, I'm 62. It's not like I'm not.
Come on, we want to see your abs.
Exactly. Like, yeah, your body changes a lot. When you start to be like mid-50s, the later on your body changes a lot. It's so interesting. Like
man.
I'm sure my six-pack is still there. It's just hidden under whatever.
Hidden. Yeah, you don't need
it's just hidden.
But
again, I'm going like.
So.
But maybe if I do educational video, it's not that I have to be there. It could be I can do a video of the process, for example. So I'm still figuring out this stuff, and if I want to do it too, I don't know. I'm still I don't know.
Thinking outside the box, though, I appreciate that a lot. And I think you're thinking outside the box about it, and then I just like a real takeaway for me from this conversation has been you saying, you can do it the way you want to do it. Like, be true to yourself. Like, yeah. I mean, those are things that you hear all the time, but the way you're saying it in relationship to how you approach social media and things like that's helpful, because you know how it is. It's like half the social media accounts that show up on your feed are people trying to tell you how to do social media, Yeah. So I just appreciate the message.
And half of the stuff that show up on the social media looks like the other,
exactly.
People doing the same thing than other people.
All the stuff you end up avoiding. So
yeah, I always say, like, don't even try to think outside of the box, because if you do that, you already assume there is a box in the first place.
Yeah, man, that's great.
So there is no boxes.
Yeah, well said.
There's no boxes.
Yeah, and it's like that thing. So nobody's as good at being. What do they say? Like, be yourself because you're the best. What is the saying? Something like I don't know. I'm butchering it, but something to the effect of nobody's as good at being you as you. So it's like
exactly.
Well, Pascal, this has been great, man. I'm always here. If I can ever do anything for you, please reach out.
Oui.
Yeah, all right, brother. Take care.
Okay. Au revoir. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a podcast guest or topic suggestion, or maybe a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host the WildFed TV show for? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 or 2 of the WildFed TV show, go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 20 episodes. Season 3 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2023. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed shirts, hoodies, hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.